absolute no-win situation. We've talked a couple times about the ongoing racial discrimination in housing. Okay? For every 4 units of housing, non-whites have access to 1. So the Redevelopment Authority has housing lists for people who need relocation. And the Minority Affairs Committee says, well, you know, you should not share the information for the housing that discriminates. You should only provide the information for those 1 in 4 units that will take everybody. And the Redevelopment Authority says, well, if we did that, and that's where you see continue white-only listing. And the Redevelopment Authority says, well, if we did that, that means that everyone is going to be competing for just these units. It's not going to add any more units for the non-whites, and it's only going to put the whites in competition with the non-whites for the housing. So it's really not a productive thing to do to provide only the open housing list. Am I explaining that? That people see what I'm saying? That if the Redevelopment Authority only shares the information for housing that will take whites and non-whites, there'll be more competition for just that 25% of the housing without adding any new housing for the non-whites. So the Redevelopment Authority says they're going to keep doing what they've been doing. But Roger Ruttnow does take a swipe at the realtors, saying, we have had almost no assistance from the real estate profession in terms of obtaining housing for minorities. The vast majority of realtors have not been in the least interested in the relocation of minority families. Frankly, both the staff and I sincerely doubt that there will be any change of heart. We're about to see the Board of Realtors be the firmest opponents to an open housing law.
So that's probably a true statement for as bad as the MRAF.
Well, the bottom line, the bottom statement, that headline?
Yeah, the realtors are just as bad.
Oh, the realtors were terrible. The realtors fought the Fair Housing Code. We're gonna see that in the next segment. The realtors, and it was part of their. Do we have any licensed realtors here?
Not anymore.
I'm sorry?
I live next door to one. She doesn't believe that redlining happened.
Oh my gosh.
But under the Realtors Code of Ethics, they couldn't show. There were times that a realtor could not show a house to a non-white person who wanted to buy the house. I mean, the realtors couldn't show houses. If a homeowner said, don't show it to a black, they couldn't show it to a black.
And that was true throughout. All I know about is the Upper Midwest.
It was the Realtors Board. It was the Realtors Code of Ethics.
Yeah.
We got a realtor story coming up. So yeah, this bomb headline is true. In November, one of the important buildings in the Triangle goes down, St. Joseph's Catholic Church. The first church in Madison that was built exclusively for one nationality. It was built for the Italians living in the bush. A very important structure. And the end of 1963, finally, December 63, we get a groundbreaking for the gay Braxton Apartments. 23 months after they started tearing housing down in the bush, we finally get a groundbreaking to build replacement housing.
2 years, and they're already.
2 years. 2 years.
So this isn't market value.
This is the gay Braxton Apartments. This is public housing for the elderly. These are those apartments on fronting on Regent Street between to Bayview to the right, to this side, and the medical center. They call it East Campus Drive, but it's Murray Street. It's We gotta bring back Murray Street. And this is what the, yeah,
So on the church,
yeah.
was it condemned?
Oh, no,
Was it
no, no.
substandard?
Oh, no, it was just in the way. It was in the way for the Madison Medical Center. That's what it was tearing down for. And I'm not sure if it's tonight or next. Here's the church and the convent and the school. And this will be torn down for the Madison Medical Center. The redevelopment authority would sell this parcel for $244,000. This parcel, the Madison Medical Center, is currently paying $243,000 a year in taxes. The property is now assessed at $2.4 million. So the city sold it for $244,000, and that's its annual take through property taxes today. This is part of the justification of urban renewal. Is we're going to knock down this old church that no one goes to anymore, and we'll collect $250,000 a year in property taxes.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
So, St. Joseph's moved to basically across from Culver's on the lot line. And now, it was moved to a new site, so people in the church got together all of their money, built what was supposed to be a temporary building. That building is still there.
Wow.
It needs a new roof. And that project is gonna take, $990-some million.
No.
$1,000
Yeah,
million.
Yikes.
Yeah, almost $1 million.
Yeah.
St. James, which is where people went to be closer, and those two churches are paired in one parish now because, yay. So St. James also needs a new roof, and they're looking at repairs on the school next door to St. James. Also another $900-some thousand. And if you think about the population who have attended those churches historically and live in that neighborhood and in those neighborhoods, ask me if any of them has $9,000 extra.
Yeah.
Like there are like 5 people who go to those churches who have any extra money whatsoever. But let's just tear that down because nobody goes there. That's all I have to say. It's messed up.
So this is the state of affairs in, I want to say, late fall, early winter '63. The church is still there, so it's before November 5th. But you see all the devastation is the only way to describe it. There are blocks that are empty. There maybe 25, 30 structures still there. So by the end of 1963, almost the entire bush has been taken down. I'm going to get a little bit now into the civil rights stories. We had 2 really big civil rights stories in 1962-63. One was huge. We had the adoption of the first fair housing code in the state of Wisconsin, which is a really good story. I don't think I'm going to get to it tonight. And we also had, well, let's just say we had a story that involved Babe Rohr and racism and re-election. So it's a shocker. So I'll get into it as far as I can. So in 1962, Lloyd Barbie was the head of the state NAACP. He was the chairman of the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights, and he was attorney in Madison. Now, the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights was created in 1952 as sort of a sop to the advocates for fair housing after an effort to enact a fair housing code failed. Future Mayor Ivan Nestigan tried to get a fair housing code passed in 1962. It failed miserably, and they created this Mayor's Commission on Human Rights just, to give him something so he wouldn't be completely embarrassed. But it had very little power, very little power. Lloyd Barbie is the chairman, and and the NAACP, he's also president of the state NAACP, and they write this really tough fair equal opportunities ordinance. It bans bias in housing, employment, public accommodations. There's fines, there's jail time, creates a 9-member commission, and the proposal is referred back to the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights, which Lloyd Barbie chairs, but only until April 17th because his term expires and Mayor Reynolds does not reappoint him, but appoints Richard Pritchard. Now, we referred last week briefly to Richard Pritchard, who in the 70s and 80s would embarrass himself by going after massage parlors and the sex industry, but in the 60s was a soldier for civil rights. He actually went to the South. He went to Montgomery. He went to Selma. He went to Birmingham. And he's still at Westminster Presbyterian Church at this time, and he takes over the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights. Now, this comes at the same time that Babe Rohr is running for re-election. He's running against a guy named Jan Marfiak. And Babe Rohr calls the NAACP, quote, a malicious force. He calls Jan Marfiak his hand-picked candidate. Now, Marfiak is an administrative assistant with the DMV. He's never met Odell Taliaferro, who's the head of the local NAACP. He's not its hand-picked candidate, but Babe Rohr says he is. There's a forum at Franklin School on the south side, and Babe Rohr says that blacks hurt themselves by supporting the NAACP and the Equal Opportunities Ordinance, and he denies being prejudiced, and he says, and this is a quote, "Some of my best friends are Negroes." We do not believe that to be the case, but he said it. Then someone starts sending anonymous postcards to all the voters in the ward, saying that John Marfiak lives in a trailer down by the river, and he doesn't pay taxes, and by the way, he's a Negro. None of this is true. None of this is true, but these postcards go out. Now, Babe Rohr, I had nothing to do with that. I had nothing to do with that. So they're at a campaign event, in a forum, and someone asks Rohr, do you think that Marfiak is a Negro? And Babe Rohr says, and Marfiak gets up and says, in all fairness, Mr. Rohr, tell me to my face, do you think I'm a Negro? And Rohr goes, well, I don't know if you're a Negro. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. I'm not going to state whether or not you're a Negro. Both newspapers blister Rohr with these editorials. Cap Times says, Rohr seeks to whip up race hate and fear to divert attention from the real issues. Race hate is a strong term in a newspaper editorial. To accuse a sitting alderman of fomenting race hate is pretty powerful. The State Journal calls him racist and says he plans to fan the flames of prejudice. Right before the election, Babe Rohr puts out a piece of campaign literature showing a picture with Horace Wilkie, who was a very popular state senator at the time, a picture taken in 1960 showing them shaking hands to make people think that Harold Wilkie was supporting him. Wilkie is not supporting him. He issues his really strong statement saying he emphatically disagrees with Rohr's refusal to disavow the racism, and he explicitly says he is not supporting Rohr's re-election. But voters in the 14th Ward do, re-electing Rohr by 10%, 1,199 votes to 999. The State Journal says, everyone is stunned by this, but the State Journal says, well, but still, we have to believe in the democratic process. We can't this picketing, these marches, these demonstrations, picketing has always had an element of phoniness in any nation where everyone has the vote. The recent trend has not only made picketing tiresome, but a bit frightening. Picketing has no legitimate place in a free society where we govern ourselves by the ballot box and not street agitation. Let them write to their congressman.
It would get worse.
It would get worse. And just days before the election, literally the weekend before the election, the two most important black leaders in America are both on the University of Wisconsin campus, but their schedule is much closer than their message. On Friday, March 30th, Dr. Martin Luther King delivers the Jonas Rosenfeld Lecture, a very supportive full house at the Union Theater. He speaks on the future of integration. Segregation is on its deathbed, he says, and the only problem is how expensive the nation will make its funeral. On Monday, literally the day before the election, Malcolm X is in town, and he takes a different tack. He actually calls for racial separation in a Great Hall speech on black nationalism in America. We reject integration, period. We've outgrown it. So in the space of a weekend, you get the central dynamic of what the debate over race in America is going to be for the next.
And where were they?
King was in the Union Theater, and Malcolm X was in the Great Hall.
Really?
Now, racism is not the only civil rights issue of the time. Obviously, we still have sexism and anti-Semitism. Now, gender issues won't really become important for a couple of years, but anti-Semitism is prevalent on campus and off. Most of you are familiar with the Madison Club. It is not quite as elite today as it was then, but back in the day, it was the premier private club where the business and civic elite of Madison entertained and intertwined with each other, but not all of the business and civic leaders, because as it turns out, they did not have any Jews, and no women and no blacks. And everyone pretty much knew why they had no Jews or women or blacks. And finally, Ruth Doyle, former state representative, future member of the Madison School Board, wife of a federal judge, mother of a future governor. Ruth Doyle is on the budget committee for the community chest, and it's Ruth Doyle who says, you know, they got a bunch of anti-Semites over there at the Madison Club. We should not be paying the membership fees for our executive director to belong to a club that is so anti-Semitic. And the community chest stops paying the dues. There will be another major story involving anti-Semitism and the Madison Club in a couple of years, but this is an early salvo. A couple of new black leaders. Marshall Colston is a social worker with the Dane County Department of Public Assistance. In 1961, he ran against Odell Taliaferro to head the local NAACP. Taliaferro beat him handily. In 1962, Taliaferro steps aside, and Marshall Colston is elected to lead the local NAACP. The woman on the little settee in profile is Betty Banks. That's Joey B. Banks' mom. Marshall Colston is Joey B. Banks, the great drummer Joey B. Banks' grandfather. And you probably know Gene Parks. Negro youth discovers people listen to him. Gene Parks, I was telling somebody last week, there's a Gene Parks item almost every year in the decade. This is Gene Parks at 16. He's just been elected president of the Wisconsin Association of Student Councils. So he's a statewide figure. He's a junior at La Follette High School. He had been on the Madison Youth Council and has many great things ahead of him. I'm just going to leave you with the introduction of what I hope was going to be the big story tonight, and that is the adoption of the Civil Rights Ordinance. The Civil Rights Ordinance, Madison in 1963 enacted the first fair housing code in the state of Wisconsin. And we did it because we had a conservative white businessman mayor. And we had a cadre of citizen activists. I mentioned them earlier, but the entire movement for a fair housing code came from women like Mary Louise Simon, who would go on to become the first woman to head a county board in Wisconsin. Helen Bukalik, and other citizen activists. There was nobody on the city council who was advocating for a fair housing code. Henry Reynolds would support it, but he wasn't a leader. It was citizen activists, and one of the overwhelming stories and the overwhelming lessons of this period is the role of citizen activists to get things done. And I don't think that degree of successful activism is happening or can happen anymore because of forces beyond our control. But it's one of the really uplifting things about this period is that citizens saw a problem, they identified a problem, they came up with a strategy to fight it, and they often succeeded. And with that, I've held you for our time, and thank you. Yeah.
One question, where does that fair housing law fall nationally? You say it was the first in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Was this a national movement for municipalities and cities?
It was developing, yeah, sure, because the national zeitgeist. I mean, this is 1963. Civil rights is one of the dominant issues in the country. 1963 is, the March for Jobs and Freedom. I can't tell you when each municipality, but certainly this is happening across the country. Yeah.
Nino Amato is going to talk about.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I'm sorry? Oh yeah, Nino. Good, thank you. Nino Amato, whose family goes back to the Bush, is giving a talk at the annual meeting of Historic Madison tomorrow at 6:30 in the probably the basement of the Italian Workingmen's Club on Regent Street, and we'll talk about memories of Bush. And I'm going, and I'm hoping for there'll be some time for questions and answers. The family did. He's Amato's Holiday House. Yeah. Nino ran for mayor. Nino was on the council, and Nino will talk about the love and memories of the Bush.
Comment on Ruth Doyle. Her husband and her son got more headlines through the decade.
Yeah.
Ruth Doyle was one of the great Madisonians of the 20th century.
Ruth Doyle is clearly the female newsmaker of the decade, and maybe even beyond. Ruth Doyle created the program for minority recruitment